Thank you.
3, 2.
So I'll just wait for everyone to kind of come on to the meeting, and then we'll kind of start with the introduction. Okay. I think I've got everyone on now. All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's PAC information meeting. We are holding this information meeting to provide interested residents with an opportunity to hear from the applicant in terms of the nature of their application, where the property is located, how the land is currently designated and zoned, and what they intend to build, what improvements they are proposing to make, and any other details they want to share with us at this time. Following the applicant's presentation, residents will be able to ask questions and comments, which we ask that they're directed through the chair. Once we have heard from residents, we will then open up to members of the committee to ask questions and make any comments. At that point, the applicant will be given an opportunity to make any further comments to the committee, should they feel there is a need to do so. Town staff and members of the committee are here listening to what is being said, and no PAC decisions or no recommendations are being made with respect to these applications. The applicant will be asked to provide a written response to the comments and questions they heard this evening, and to provide that written response back to the town in advance of the scheduled public meeting. The public meeting for both of these, for this rezoning application, is being held on June 29th as part of the regularly scheduled council meeting that starts that evening at 6 p.m. If any residents have any additional comments that they want to provide in writing to council, they need to do so at least 2 weeks prior to that council meeting. So those written comments can be included as part of the council agenda package. The staff report will be prepared and made available to council, to the applicant, and to the public in advance of the June 29th public meeting. So now I'm going to hand it over to, I believe, Mr. Burgess to introduce the applicant, or is it Mr. Solani?
Deputy Mayor Meloche, I'll make some a brief presentation, and then we'll have our planning consultant, Mr. Palmer, present as well. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. I need the permission from the host to allow screen sharing. So Linda or Greg, if you can allow that to happen. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. So we need that to be allowed.
Can you hear the try, Larry?
Okay, I'll try it again, Greg. There we go. Okay. So can everyone see that?
Not yet,
No.
Larry.
Just dark screen. It says it's sharing, but
There you go. It's working.
Okay. So this evening is an information meeting. It's a special meeting of the Planning Information Committee. There's no application that's being heard this evening. Instead, this is the second of the information sessions that we're having regarding the draft new comprehensive zoning bylaw. So I will start by just providing a bit of an overview with respect to why are we holding this information session? What's the purpose of it? How the community has changed since we had last adopted a comprehensive zoning bylaw for the town. And that occurred in 1994. So it's been over 25 years since a new comprehensive zoning bylaw has been prepared for the town, and how we expect the community to continue to evolve and change over the next 20 to 30 years, and why it's important at this time that we move forward with a new comprehensive zoning bylaw. We are here to listen. So at this point in time, there's no decisions or recommendations that are going to be made. We are welcoming and inviting comments and questions either this evening or as part of written correspondence or emails to us, or if you want to schedule a meeting with Mr. Burgess or myself, we can do that as well. The statutory public meeting under the Planning Act, the municipality is required to host a statutory public meeting, and that's being held by council at a special meeting on June the 29th. Following the introductory presentation that I'm making right now, Ron Palmer, who is the lead consultant on this, will provide some more details regarding the new comprehensive zoning bylaw, what's in it, and what are some of the key changes. And then at that point, we will open it up to questions and comments through the chair. In terms of who's part of the project team, before I get into the actual content here, Mr. Burgess and myself are the town staff in the planning division that are overseeing the project. The lead consultant is Ron Palmer, and Jessica Krasniski is working with Ron as planners who we've hired to be the lead with respect to the new comprehensive zoning bylaw. Ron is also the principal author of the recently completed new official plan. So the plan that the town adopted in 2018 that was approved and is in effect, Mr. Palmer is the author of that document. So with respect to where LaSalle is and where we came from, it continues to be a growing community with over 30,000 people. We're strategically located at the busiest international crossing between Canada and the United States. And we're part of an economic region on both sides of the international border with over 4 million people that live in this area. So it's quite a unique location from a geography point of view in terms of Ontario and in terms of Canada. There have been two key initiatives that the town has embarked on over the last 20 years or so that have been transformative in nature. And they've really made LaSalle what it is today, the LaSalle Greenway initiative and the Livable neighborhood initiative. And what those consist of, the Greenway initiative, it's about linkages. So it's about connecting wildlife habitat to each other, urban neighborhoods to the waterfront, and people to nature. So there's a series of inland watercourses and linear facilities where we've acquired land in those areas. And that's where we built our the bulk of our recreational trail system is in the Greenway. That's part of, again, this initiative going back 20 years. Well, we're continuing to build that out, and we're continuing to acquire property in those areas together with the natural areas such as LaSalle Woodlot, the Riam Prairie, and we own several hundred hectares of land that are Carolinian forests, tall grass prairies, and Detroit River wetlands. So these have been acquired over the last 20 years, and we continue to assemble land as it becomes available to add to the overall Greenway in LaSalle. With respect to securing these corridors, it's important to recognize that the corridors provide many different benefits to the community. Storm drainage being the first one. Those are the major outlets, Turkey Creek, River Canard to the Detroit River that drain LaSalle and provide, all of the necessary outlets with respect to all of the storm sewers in the community. But they also provide important wildlife linkages and recreational corridors for today's residents and residents who want to move into this community. We have also, through the Greenway initiative, there has been investments that have been made in shoreline restoration, fish habitat, and waterfront facilities. And those continue as we know the town has moved forward recently with acquisition of additional lands along the waterfront, that again, there's going to be additional enhancements there and recreational opportunities along that part of the waterfront. With respect to the Livable Neighborhood Initiative, this consists of 3 or 4 different components. The first one was the investments that were made in the town center area. So investments have been made in infrastructure, in services, in amenities, locating the library, the senior center, and other types of facilities, the park and the plaza area, all are in part of creating a vibrant, walkable, compact downtown core for LaSalle. Currently, there's over 2,000 residents, many of which are active seniors, that are able to live within the town center area and have a 5 to 10 minute walk to shopping and restaurants and all of the services that are available at the town center. The second one is with respect to our neighborhoods themselves. Over 50 miles of new sidewalks have been built since 1999. And those are along existing streets that were such as sections of Bouffard and Ream and other neighborhoods that such as Todd Lane that were there before, as well as in all new developments that have been built since 1999. Prior to 99, sidewalks were not mandatory. And in many developments that were built prior to those dates, they were never part of the roads that were built. They didn't include sidewalks. Over 3,000 street trees are now planted. Again, there's a requirement as part of all new development. Not only are sidewalks required, but street trees so that there's tree-lined, canopied areas over time where it's shady and comfortable and safe for people to walk within their neighborhoods. We have over 25 miles of multi-use trails that have been built and they continue to be built. A new active transportation master plan was recently commissioned and completed for the town, and it built on the work that was started in 1999. And it promotes walking, running, cycling for people of all ages to, again, encourage people to live active, healthy lifestyles. And then again, another real signature item for LaSalle was the decision that was made over 15 years ago to buy the land for the Vollmer complex. So the land that was purchased wasn't just for 14,000 people or 20,000 or 30,000. Sufficient land was bought so that that facility could be expanded over time as the population grows to what is expected to be 60,000 people over the next 30 years. But the decision was made at that time to buy enough land along Laurier Parkway near Malden so it could be expanded as the community grew and the needs of the community evolved. And then some of the more recent ones was the investments and the activities that occurred prior to COVID, the night markets, the outdoor movie nights, the community festivals, the civic plazas, and all the activities that are now being programmed at the Vollmer and on the Civic Plaza with respect to community events. Before those facilities were available, the town did not have the ability really to program and have those types of activities and events for the residents of this community. I just want to provide a very quick summary of major investments that have been made. So prior to 2005, over $80 million was invested in trunk infrastructure, 40 million of which so that the community could have the necessary basic infrastructure to meet today's requirements, but also to double in size. Over 25 million was spent to expand the sewage treatment plant to allow an additional 30,000 people to be able to build their homes in LaSalle. Trunk feeder mains were built, storm drainage outlet and improvements along Turkey Creek. And as I mentioned, the purchase of land for the recreation complex and major trunk outlets in the Huron Line, Howard Avenue area, which was a growing urban area of LaSalle. Since 2005, an additional 130 million has been invested in, again, infrastructure and amenities with the one of the larger shares was the 36 million for the Balmer complex, building Laurier and extending a trunk sanitary sewer for the Bouffard Planning District. Over 13 million was invested in that area. And then in some of our existing neighborhoods over in the southwestern quadrant and at the Heritage Estates area to improve existing infrastructure for existing neighborhoods. Similarly, Todd Lane and Malden Road received almost $20 million worth of investments to keep up with the improvements that were necessary because of increases in traffic. We've recently spent upwards of $10 million to acquire a large parcel of land in the waterfront. And this is going to be the focus over the next 5 to 10 years for another major community activity hub along the waterfront of LaSalle for, not only today's generations, but future generations of LaSalle residents to really enjoy the many, many amenities that this community has to offer. And then more recently, the construction of new public works and civic center buildings in the community. So that's, for a community of 30,000, that's well over $200 million of investments in hard infrastructure and in facilities to set up the growth that is going to continue to take place over the next 20 to 30 years in LaSalle. In terms of the forecast going forward, we just recently completed a growth forecast for the town with the assistance of C.N. Watson, and they're projecting that the town's population, which doubled in the last 20 years, is projected to double again over the next 30 years to have a population of approximately 60,000 people in 3 decades. And as I mentioned earlier, in the fall of 2018, we adopted a new official plan, and it received approvals with 3 key elements being an expanded town center. So the area that was previously the town center is now being allowed to expand and to grow. New mixed-use corridors, districts along Malden and along Laurier Parkway to provide opportunities for additional shopping and multi-unit residential development to take place along those corridors. And that's where transit is also being invested in. So we currently have transit corridors that Malden Road is one of those, and Laurier will, as the residential areas there expand in the future, there'll be expansion of transit down the Laurier mixed-use corridor as well. And then the third one being the renewed emphasis on public and private sector redevelopment in the waterfront. So those are 3 fundamental objectives of the council adopted and approved official plan with respect to those areas of LaSalle. And this map shows that graphically what I just said was here you can see the expanded town center, the mixed-use corridor along Malden from the town center to Laurier Parkway, and then along Laurier Parkway with the Balmer district, and then extending all the way over to the business park, the future business park at Howard Avenue. And then the waterfront district, the existing business park, and then a large commercial district over in the expanded Heritage Estates area. These are now this is the land use designation, which goes and refines them, provides more detail, and these designations then have a list of permitted uses and policies in the official plan with respect to each of these areas. So where does that leave us in terms of the new comprehensive zoning bylaw? So the zoning bylaw really should be considered as basically chapter 2 of the same book. So the first chapter is the official plan, which sets the overall policy and direction. And the new comprehensive zoning bylaw is the second and final chapter. And it provides the regulations that are used for building permit purposes, the detailed definitions, and it is a major document from the point of view that it's used going forward to then implement the policies that council's adopted that have been approved. Part of the new comprehensive zoning bylaw is also to introduce regulations to comply with the legislative and policy changes adopted by the province of Ontario. And Mr. Palmer will speak in greater detail about those. There's been several significant changes in the legislation and in the planning policies of Ontario that we now have to implement in LaSalle in the new comprehensive zoning bylaw. And then we need to bring forward regulations that support evolving community needs related to affordable housing, home-based employment, energy efficient built forms, transit supportive land uses, accessibility, and safe walkable neighborhoods. So those are three primary objectives of what the new comprehensive zoning bylaw is intended to do. And it's going to replace the bylaw that currently is in existence that was written back in 1994 based on the official plan that was adopted in the late 1980s. So with that, I will end my session here and I will turn it over to Mr. Palmer, who will take us through the new comprehensive zoning bylaw.
Thank you, Larry. If you want to go to the next slide, just give a brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about tonight. Larry has provided a good overview of the official plan, and I'm not going to repeat a lot of what Larry has said, but I am going to be touching on a number of topics that he did mention. I do want to give you a fairly detailed overview of what the zoning bylaw is. I would like to talk about what this zoning bylaw is doing for the town of LaSalle, what's in the bylaw, and then we were asked to look at somewhat more detail 7 key issues, and I'm going to go through each of those as well. Those are the subject of the background report that came out at the same time as the draft zoning bylaw. I'm going to end with next steps. I'll turn it back to Larry to close it off with questions and comments. Next slide. Again, Larry did mention that this is a virtual public information center session, and I'm going to provide you with an overview. Again, we are here to hear questions and concerns, and Jessica Krusniski is here with me, and we will be taking detailed notes and making responses to comments and concerns that we hear prior to going to council at the end of June. Next slide. Larry set up very well what a zoning bylaw does. It gets into the details of how land is to be used within the town of LaSalle. It talks about where buildings and structures can be located on an individual lot, and it talks about types of buildings and how they are to be used. Some of the elements of the zoning bylaw are the lot sizes, parking requirements, building heights, and setbacks. And importantly, the official plan, as Larry said, sets an overarching framework, and the zoning bylaw provides all the details of how development is to occur within specific areas of the town over time. What is also important is that planning in Ontario is done in a context. And before I talk about the 3 points on this slide, planning is the municipality gets the legislative authority to do planning from the Ontario Planning Act. The province then produces policy documents that provide guidance for municipalities to do their work. What we do know, and what comes from the Planning Act, is that it is a requirement of the zoning bylaw to implement and conform with your new official plan. As Larry quite rightly said, the zoning bylaw is the much more detailed second chapter of the planning framework for the town of LaSalle. We're also required to conform to the county official plan, just like your official plan conforms to the county official plan, and all the provincial legislation that goes out there. Importantly, one document which was just updated in 2020, the provincial policy statement, provides substantial planning guidance to all municipalities in Ontario, and it's our job to be consistent with that document. Next slide. So to begin the discussion about the zoning bylaw, it starts with a list of definitions. We have 94 individual definitions that talk about various land uses, various regulatory elements, and it provides the detailed understanding of the phrases that are used within the bylaw. Some of the definitions, like the three that I'm showing here, angular plane, first floor height, and setbacks, come with some explanatory graphics. Most do not. However, it is a set of definitions that is very important to the overall interpretation of the bylaw. Next slide. The chapter after the definitions chapter is called General Provisions. And we have 27 general provisions in this bylaw, dealing with things like accessory uses in buildings, parking, site triangles, loading space requirements, permitted yard encroachments. These are typically zoning regulations that apply to multiple zones within the town. And it's put in a general provision section so that they don't have to be simply repeated within every zone category. Very important part of the zoning bylaw. And again, there's about 27 general provisions that are provided in this bylaw. Next slide. This is an example. The one on the left is a chart that talks about accessory uses and buildings and what the side yard setbacks are required within the various zones. The one on the right, permitted encroachments for things that may hang out from the primary building envelope into required side yards. Everything is very tightly regulated and controlled in order to ensure good neighbor transitions. Next slide. One of the key components of the bylaw are in fact the zone regulations. And we have 10 districts identified within the town of LaSalle. And within those 10 districts, there's 25 individual zone categories that are provided and dealt with in a fair amount of detail. The examples shown on the right are the two zones that we use to help identify the town center designation that Larry talked about around the LaSalle Town Center with Malden Road in the center of it. This part of the table identifies permitted uses, the list of permitted uses, and it also identifies how we're dealing with the uses that are required at grade. In the LaSalle Town Center, we are looking for non-residential uses at grade where they front along Malden Road and Sprucewood Avenue. That's what that particular section talks about. Next slide. After we get through the list of permitted uses, we also identify a series of regulatory elements. In general, a lot of the regulatory elements are similar among all the zones, not necessarily the regulation, but the elements of the regulation. Things like minimum lot area, lot frontage, minimum landscape open space, front yards, rear yards, building height, angular plane requirements, parking, drive-through facilities, and so on. These are very specific regulatory elements that are then defined in how they are to be dealt with within each zone. Next slide. So the two zones that we talked about, TC1 and TC2, are identified here on this map. So that we have a total of 42 maps. Every property in the town of LaSalle is assigned a zone, and it is part of this zoning bylaw and will be on one of those 42 maps. Here we have Malden Road over on the right-hand side going north-south, and we have Sprucewood Avenue sort of going through the middle of it in an east-west direction. So the generality of the Malden Town Center from the official plan is now given much more detail in the zoning bylaw, and it's subdivided into the categories so that the town is able to manage land use and the regulatory elements within each of the identified zone districts on this map. Over to the left-hand side is a more typical residential neighborhood where we apply the more typical residential regulatory framework. Next slide. We also thought we would have a look at what the rural elements of LaSalle might look like. We've established 3 different zones within the rural area outside of your urban boundary. We have rural residential, we have rural commercial, and we have agriculture. Here, the lists of permitted uses are substantially less than in the Malden Town Center, focused on the existing rural agricultural context, dealing with the houses that exist, what those rural commercial uses are, and then dealing with agriculture as an ongoing and important economic activity within the town. Here we, in the regulatory elements, it's probably the least amount of regulatory element in any of the zones. Permitted accessory buildings, minimum lot area, frontage, front, rear, and exterior side yards, building height, and permissions for outdoor storage on those properties. Again, the next slide identifies what a map looks like in the rural agricultural area, a little more plain than in the urban center of your community. Here we have Howard Avenue over on the right-hand side going north-south. We have Broderick Road north-south in about the center. And what it shows there is the pattern of the rural residential and rural commercial versus the much larger expanses of the agricultural zoned areas. Next slide. Larry mentioned some specific pieces of provincial legislation that we have been required to conform with in the zoning bylaw. In fact, Bill 108 came out after the 2018 official plan, but we're still required to include provisions for what are called additional residential units. Historically, these were typically identified as accessory apartments in an existing home. Now, in accordance with the province's requirements, each single detached and semi-detached house is allowed to have 2 additional residential units, one within the existing residential building and a second one in an accessory building that is not attached to the existing home. Some of the things that we are allowed to deal with when considering additional residential units is the type of dwelling units that qualify and where they can be built, parking requirements, size of the additional residential units, and how access is achieved for the residents of those additional residential units. The next slide talks a little bit more about the details. In this bylaw, we talk about, as I mentioned, that additional residential units are permitted within single detached and semi-detached dwellings within R1 and R2 and within the residential district zone 2, only in those 3 zoning categories. As I mentioned, we are managing the scale of these units. An attached additional residential unit, one that is within an existing dwelling, is limited to a maximum of 40% of the floor space of that dwelling. And in a detached situation, we're limiting the gross floor area to about 75 square meters as a maximum. We are requiring additional residential units to be connected to municipal sewer and water services, and they need to be put on a permanent footing and foundation. What we're looking for here fundamentally is that these units are appropriately built in accordance with the building code and the fire code. And that's an important principle in order to protect the health and safety of those residents that are living in these additional residential units. Next slide. Lodging houses in LaSalle. As the reach of post-secondary education facilities impacts LaSalle, or other opportunities for lodging houses are established throughout the community, we had a look at how lodging houses can be appropriately managed in the LaSalle context. And it's a very interesting and complicated topic. There is legislation in Ontario that prohibits the municipality from controlling the tenure of housing. That means you can't regulate whether it's an ownership unit or rental unit or any other form of ownership or rental. And that means really that we have a hard time regulating lodging houses in the zoning bylaw. We don't believe that the zoning bylaw is a very effective tool at all. More effective tools are municipal act tools, as well as maintenance and occupancy bylaws, licensing bylaws, and of course the implementation of the building code and fire codes. Again, here we're trying to make sure that the residents of any lodging house are appropriately dealt with in terms of their health and safety. What we found in our research is that the most effective strategy in establishing is to establish a rental housing licensing bylaw. And what's really interesting with respect to the legislative framework in Ontario, in order to have a licensing bylaw, they have to be specifically permitted in the zoning bylaw. So you can't prohibit a lodging house and then try to license it. It has to be permitted, then licensed. It's really important that if we're permitting them and then hopefully licensing them, the zoning bylaw again needs to define it, and we've defined lodging houses into two categories: rooming house and boarding house. And we permit them only within the residential 1 and residential 2 zones, because it's typically only single detached houses that turn into a rooming house type of unit. Next slide. We were asked to have a closer look at the LaSalle Town Center and how things would develop over time and how we might achieve the mixed use developments that are desirable within the LaSalle Town Center. So we have established those two zones, Town Center 1 and Town Center 2 zones. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we've required all lots that front onto Sprucewood and Malden to have at least 50% of their Act grade floor space in non-residential uses, with a preference for retail and service commercial uses, and that their primary entrance would actually face those roads. In the TC1 zone specifically, we're looking for a tighter, more urban feel and look. So we're shrinking down front yard requirements and exterior side yard requirements to 0, hoping to get a greater street wall frontage condition to make it look and feel more urban, more mixed use, and more desirable for walking, shopping, and having some fun. So in terms of the LaSalle Town Center, we are looking for the further evolution in terms of its scale. We are looking to promote a full range and mix of residential as well as retail, service, commercial, and institutional uses, and hoping that it continues its amazing evolution into the center of this community. Next slide. The mixed-use corridors, which are identified as Larry identified them on the official plan map. These are intended, as Larry mentioned, to promote enhanced transit. And to promote enhanced transit, you need to have more people and more functions in proximity to the transit facility. That will promote more ridership and will disperse the ridership throughout the day. So one of the key issues that was identified, and particularly along Malden Road, was the interface with this new mixed-use corridor idea with the existing residential communities that abut them. And this is particularly important where the lot depths are narrow, abutting existing residential uses. So we've come up with a strategy to promote a more comfortable interface that involves three primary elements. First of all, within the mixed-use corridor zones, we are requiring a landscape planting strip adjacent to any abutting residential use. We are setting building heights and a new idea that for LaSalle, the angular plane, which means that the closer you get to an abutting residential use, the application of a 45-degree angle that mitigates the impacts of height as we get closer to those residential uses. In addition to the landscape planting strip and the angular plane application, we have a simple height limitation, and that establishes a maximum height. Furthermore, we have rear and interior side yard setback requirements that are intended to, again, promote a comfortable interface between the new development and existing housing. Next slide. We never like to leave out the rural and agricultural area. It's a significant part of the town of LaSalle. It's part of the economy of the area, and it's an important part of the character of the community. So this bylaw, we have recognized existing uses, and we're trying to manage the further development to ensure that that rural agricultural character can be maintained. We want to make sure that building footprints do not overwhelm the property. So we've included a floor space maximum, ground floor space maximum related to the lot area. And we are including restrictions on where accessory buildings can be located on a lot so that there's again, a comfortable relationship between lots that can be quite substantially different in terms of a rural residential use versus a rural commercial use versus a more traditional agricultural use. So we have been thinking about how to ensure the proper evolution of the rural agricultural area while recognizing that the agricultural economy, while not huge in LaSalle, is still an important part of your community. Next slide. Farm help accommodations is an interesting topic. Again, substantial federal regulatory elements here come into play, but in the zoning bylaw, we've tried to be relatively permissive in allowing farm help accommodation. We do define it, and it is permitted on the same lot as an operating farm in the agricultural zone. We have established minimum floor area requirements, and that's intended to make sure they're not jam-packed with people. Again, that's part of a health and safety requirement that we are trying to achieve here. Again, they are detached from the principal farmhouse on the property, and there's a maximum of 2 accessory buildings, and they can take the form of a mobile home or a bunkhouse, and they are to be specifically assigned to farm help accommodation. And again, only within the agricultural zone. This is about bona fide farmers here in this in the rural agricultural part of LaSalle. Next slide. Another interesting zone. Another interesting zone, which is pretty unique to LaSalle, is what we're calling the Future Urban Development Zone, DU, Deferred Urban. In LaSalle, you have a very significant area, about 800 hectares of land that has been planned for future urban development based on sewage treatment capacity, road infrastructure that, as Larry mentioned, some of it has been evolving over time. And that is in and around the Vollmer Center. It's in the Bouffard and Howard areas, and it will accommodate significant growth over time. However, LaSalle has some concerns so far about how stormwater management will be dealt with, how environmental features will be protected, and we're not quite ready to assign individual zoning categories in this area until there's been significant work done to help us establish what the zone should be. So we've established this deferred urban zone with the intent that it's an important part of the future of LaSalle, that we're looking for a minimization of new investment on existing properties in anticipation of full urban development once the studies identified in the official plan have been completed to the satisfaction of the town. So the zone is intended to anticipate future urban development. It is expected to promote a low level of development investment until such time as the lands become ready for full urban development. Next slide. The next steps, I think Larry talked about this a little bit. This is our second virtual public information session. The last one was on May 27th, I believe, when we had a good turnout and some good comments. After tonight, we will be considering, Larry and Alan and Jessica and I and other municipal staff, every comment that we get, every concern, we will be codifying and providing a response. And that will, in some cases, result in ongoing refinements and adjustments to the draft zoning bylaw before we get to council with an amended zoning bylaw, final draft, at that council public meeting on June 29th. And with that, I'll turn it back to Larry to talk about, to open up the questions and comments.
Thanks, Ron, for that explanation. And certainly there's a lot more in the document itself. The maps themselves deal specifically with property. So I'm sure people are interested to find out how their particular lands or neighboring lands are proposed to be zoned. And similarly, the regulations and definitions, there's quite a bit to digest there in terms of the way the bylaw is laid out. So with that, we are available not only this evening, but we've provided through Mr. Burgess emails. You can call them, you can email them, you can send in correspondence to us, drop off correspondence at the town hall. Now we are open tomorrow. The town hall opens by appointment because we moved to a different level in COVID, which allows us to do that. So we're available in many different ways to reach us. And as Ron indicated, the intent is for us to understand what the comments are, what some of the questions are and some of the concerns, and we will provide responses to those, some of which will likely result in some further refinements to the draft that has been presented to date, all of which will go to council following the statutory public meeting. Depending on the nature of the comments, we may have all of our responses by the 29th, or they may be coming in at a subsequent meeting. At this stage, we're not, we still have, 3 or 4 weeks before that date. So we'll have to see what comes in terms of us being able to provide a final draft on the 29th. It may be that the final draft comes in, in July as opposed to June 29th, but we'll keep everyone posted depending on what comes in the door between now and the 29th to see whether or not we need to provide some further time and prepare a draft that comes back after the 29th, which is the statutory public meeting. So with that, I will turn it back to the Deputy Mayor for, at this point of the public information session, we're open to questions and comments. I know there's a number of residents who have registered to speak this evening, and also members of council and members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Solani. I do have a list of delegates here. So I'm just going to start kind of in the order that they were presented to me. And the first one I have is Kelly Smith.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, everybody can? Good. Great presentation. I learned a lot, and I was happy to see that some of the concerns brought forth by some of the members of the group that I'm affiliated with, the Malden Corridor Community Safety Group, these concerns that were brought up at the last meeting that talked about the rezoning of the former Michigan Tavern property were considered and actually brought into play. So that was very, very good. Very happy to hear that. Also, I learned a lot about the community in general and things about what you're going to do moving forward. I have a bit of a concern still, because one of the things that you're quite clear about was that you want the Malden Road corridor to become non-residential. So my question then would be, what would the reason have been for the town allowing the building of such large, expensive homes between Morton and Edgemore, if ultimately this was your plan months later? That I think is a bit of an issue. And how can we move, how can we have more development occur in the Malden corridor when it already can't handle the number of cars, the traffic that's there, and the people that travel it daily? I don't know if you're familiar with what happened at the August meeting that dealt with a lot of this rezoning of the former Michigan Tavern area, but I challenged anybody on council, anybody that works for the town, to come on over and meet me at McNabb and or Morton and Malden any morning, 8:30, outside of COVID, when buses are running and everybody's trying to get to work, trying to make that left turn onto Malden Road, not just out of that side street, but many along Malden, whether you're on the east or the west side of it. It's an accident waiting to happen. And although your plan sounds wonderful in terms of this walking town where you're walking from place to place and whatnot, my biggest concern as a teacher and as a mom of 3 boys would be safety. I think that really needs to be looked at. And in terms of that, from last August until now, the only safety improvement I'm aware of, and please tell me about more, but the only one I'm aware of is the addition of the signage and the white crosswalk at Ream and Malden Road, which thankfully replaces the holder and those crazy Canadian flags that were used in the past to cross there. So great for that, but I think a lot more needs to be done before we can talk about having this multi-use corridor with all of these things that aren't residential. We have so many problems now. what else do I have here? There's a lot going on in the area, as it sounds like. We've got the waterfront, we've got the Vollmer area, we have all of this. What's happening in terms of this Malden thoroughfare? Is it going to be top priority with this building up of the multi-use rezoning? Have you looked at the bridge? Does the bridge need to be redone, bulked up, widened? Is it true that there's going to be 4 lanes on Malden Road, or are there the existing 2 and then that turning lane in front of Argus or between Argus and Edgemore? Is that considered the 3rd lane, and we're only looking at a 4th in front of the Imperial Diner? What's happening there? So a lot of questions for you. And I have to admit that my presentation isn't what I thought, because like I said, you did answer questions that I had, and I was happy to hear about some of the things that you said. So thank you very much for listening. Do I have any time left? Yes?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Andrew is going to take over my time then. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I understand that the core element of having properties developed on Malden Road is understood. That's not an issue. My biggest concern is that we have new structures, that they fit in with the existing structures, so that we have some older homes, newer homes. We need to make that infusion of commercial investment so that it fits in with everybody else's investments. I know that when we invested here, we had expectations of, and we knew what Malden was then. And it would be great if we could understand what the limitation of those, the height is for the mixed use corridor. I think it's great that you put in these strips, plant strips, I think you call them, and as well as the angle. I think that can really help. So I was just wondering what is the limitation of the height for that mixed use corridor?
Deputy Mayor, if you'd like, I could respond to that. So Mr. Palmer, myself, and our teams spent quite a bit of time looking at that, and we came back with a proposal that's in the draft that limits it to 3 stories. So we're looking at a maximum height along Malden Road of 11 meters, which is the same as what the R1 zone allows. So right now, when you look at any of the adjacent streets in terms of what's permitted that someone can construct, it's basically a 3-story structure. And we're not permitting 6-story buildings or 4-story or 5-story buildings. We're looking at it as an area that, given the fabric in that area and the proximity of the adjacent low density residential areas, our recommendation to council is that part of the MU2 zone, which is the mixed use zone for Malden Road, would be limited to 2 to 3 stories. Whereas when you go out on Laurier Parkway, it's pretty well greenfield. They're going to be larger lots, deeper lots. The new development isn't there in terms of adjacency. They will be able to go higher depending on the size of the lot and applying the angular plane. But we felt, given the amount of existing low density residential, to provide that transition that Mr. Palmer spoke about, the appropriate transition, we're limiting it to the 3-story height.
I think that's outstanding. Does that include the top of the roof?
It depends on the roof. So if it's flat roof, it's measured to the top. There's a definition of how you measure it. If it's like a gable or a different, mansard type roof, then it's usually the midspan of the roof. So it depends on the building type as to whether it goes to the top or the midspan.
What about elevator shafts or HVAC units on top? Are they included?
Those are typically considered to be exceptions, and they have to be screened. So if there's, an elevator in the building, for example, it would have to be screened as part of site plan control, but that would not count for height.
Understood. Thank you very much. Appreciate you extending the session.
Okay. Mr. Smith, that was everything for you?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Alan Ali.
Hi, I think my wife is going to speak first, and then if there's still time, I've got a couple questions.
Okay, thank you.
So I apologize if this is already covered. 2 kids home, dog home, lots of chaos happening. in our household today. So thank you for this presentation. It was extremely helpful for the pieces of that I heard. I'm happy to hear about the 3-story building limitation along Malden Road. So my one question is, I know that this was an issue back in August. So like I said, I'm not sure if this is already covered, but in terms of the parking, and before it was asking for consideration to like reduce the number of parking spots. And I feel it's important to ensure that whatever the structure that is going there, it has enough parking to accommodate residents, if they're shops, for the customers, for the employees, and not to have the overflow parking go along residential streets, right? You talk about wanting the community to be a walkable community, for people to be walking along the corridor to access the shops. The streets then have to be safe, especially there's lots of children running around. We can't have all these cars parked down the streets causing kids running in between cars. They're going to get hit. So I think it's very important that whatever is being built along the corridor has enough parking to accommodate, like I said, customers, residents, and employees. My other, concern, or just something to maybe give some consideration to, I know that you talked about eliminating some of like, I don't know if I'm using the right terms here, but the front and like side setback. So it'd kind of be like right up against the road. Depending on what's being built, there could potentially be obstructions. Like if there's a patio and now you have patio tables and umbrellas. Malden is a very busy road. Trying to make a turn and now having your visibility potentially impacted is going to affect the safety of the residents. So I do ask for maybe some consideration in that area as well. And then I'll leave it to my husband.
Okay. Switch spots.
Okay.
Hi, guys. Thank you very much for this opportunity. There's a lot of great information here. The 3 stories, I think is reasonable. That's good news. I liked the 45-degree angle rule. So thank you. I think that was great. One of the first things that I'm curious about, I think I saw in one of the plans that there was the intention to run sidewalk down the west side of Malden. So I'm kind of curious about whether that's still the plan and what the timeline is for that. My other questions revolve around the overall concept for this Malden strip. I can understand, like from this, you can see a clear vision that's kind of defined of, like a shop, walking, entertainment kind of area. I know I've driven through other towns and seen that and said, this would be nice inside of LaSalle. But I also know that talking with my neighbors in at least this area, it's not really the feel of our neighborhood and the neighborhoods near us. So I can see where some of the plans you have, the buildings, the plan is for the buildings to be right up to the sidewalk to have this urban feel. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the zoning plan is to have that all the way up Malden, and to what you call it. So I guess and to have a requirement for a certain percentage of them to have shops on the first floor. So last year when we had the zoning discussion, I had brought up the question about whether that was still a viable option given all the changes in the world with COVID and so many brick and mortar shops being closed. So I guess my first question in this dialogue is what's driving the vision, and whether that vision has any research and data behind it to say whether that vision is a viable vision for our corridor, which it could be. Yeah, so, is it still viable to have a lot of buildings that have brick and mortar shop space on them? Or in a post-COVID world, is that not something that we should be aiming for, given, we could end up having a lot of places that have empty space, thus creating blight, thus creating vacancy, and driving down neighborhoods where people don't want to live in a place that has like nothing underneath it. Or is there a plan to stagger this? Is there a stepped approach of saying, okay, we have this vision, we want to start from the town core and start opening up okay, now we're going to do this many blocks over and open this up and let that establish itself and build up, and then see how that's going, and if it's viable, continue to stretch it out, versus it just being a random smattering of wherever a developer has an opportunity to build something and it's not really cohesive. It's not useful to have an urban front shop in the middle of nowhere where you can't walk to the next one because there's a bunch of houses or undeveloped property in between. So yeah, I guess what's the background that is driving the vision, and when was the last time we looked at the viability of that?
Deputy Mayor Malash, maybe I can start and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Palmer. With respect to the buildings themselves, so the setback that's being proposed for the MU2 zone is 3 meters, so it's not a zero lot line. And there's site visibility triangles as well that are required. So there's certainly public safety is utmost in terms of the way these regulations are being developed. With respect to the requirement for commercial on the first floor, that's not the requirement along Malden Road. That's only in the town center. When Mr. Palmer talked about the TC1 and TC2 zones, that is the more urban area, which is we expect that to be highly urbanized. And what you see in the town center has taken probably 20 years to evolve to where it is right now. So it was a community of 14,000, and there was a Zara store that had 25,000 square feet and a couple of restaurants. There wasn't much there 20 years ago, and that's evolved over 20 years to what you're seeing there today. What we see going forward, going south, is there will likely be some small scale residential, smaller apartment buildings will be constructed, and maybe some smaller shops that will be built over time. It's meant to service a population over the next 20 to 30 years that's going to double. So even though today there isn't a demand for all of that area to become shops or restaurants, we're reserving spaces and saying that as that area develops and redevelops over time, we're putting regulations in there that allow that area to develop properly and to be compatible with the adjacent low density residential area, knowing there isn't enough demand for that to develop in 5 years. It's going to redevelop over 10, 20 years is what's going to happen. And then the final point, sorry.
I'm sorry, guys.
That's okay. The final point before I turn it over to Mr. Palmer is with respect to road safety and the idea of additional sidewalks and improvements to Malden Road. There is a Malden Road EA, class environmental assessment, that's underway. Mr. Mara, who is our Director of Public Works, Town Engineer, and Deputy CAO, he's overseeing that, and there will be more information coming to the public at a council meeting with respect to that in the near future. But that is a document that looked at traffic today, looked at traffic in the future, and is recommending a complete transformation of that corridor in terms of pedestrian safety, as well as cycling safety and safety for cars and intersection improvements. So we're talking, tens of millions of dollars, and it'll likely have to be built in phases over time. And similarly, the development or redevelopment is going to happen in phases over time. It's not going to happen in advance of that infrastructure being built there as well. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Mr. Palmer just to talk a little bit more about the vision for the mixed use corridor.
Well, Larry, you said almost everything I was going to say, so I don't have much to add, other than the vision for the mixed use corridor comes from the vision that was developed through the official plan process and approved back in 2018. So we're building on the vision that was established in the official plan and implementing it through the zoning bylaw. And Larry is absolutely right. The way that this corridor will evolve, and we're trying to manage the evolution. It's an opportunity. It's not a requirement for everyone next week to go out and start building this corridor. But you have to begin with the vision and implement the vision and get it implemented over time. So it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen over a very long period of time. And as the official plan identified, the population of LaSalle is expected to double over the next 20, 25 years. So we need to recognize what LaSalle might look like in 20, 25 years.
All right, thank you. Thank you for all your hard work and your time tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we have Mohammed Al Garusha.
Yes, hi, good evening. Thank you for your presentation. My main concern is having a building in bigger size means safety issue for us and traffic on Malden, especially on Edgemore and O'Meara area, as my wife walks our kids every day to school. Also considering my privacy from my backyard and my safety as the building is right behind me. My backyard is visible to them. What could be done to protect my right and my privacy? No privacy means less safety for us. That's all my concern, please.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Mr. Solani, is there anything to do?
I believe those comments are with respect to the redevelopment application for the former Michigan Tavern site. So certainly that application is still active and no decisions have been made, and that will have to come back to council. But from a staff and our planning consultants' point of view, there are a number of mitigations that can put in place, height being one, landscaping, and all kinds of other elements with respect to site plan control in terms of how do we manage that transition between the adjacent low density residential homes and the new building that would be constructed on Malden Road. The important thing to recognize that if council agrees with what's being recommended, it would be limited to 3 stories at that location, as opposed to a building that's of higher height, which will go a long way to address many of the concerns that we had heard back when that application was before council. But there are other elements, as Mr. Palmer indicated. There are a number of those that will be applied through any of these properties at that transition area, and landscaping, fencing, orientation of lighting, where the parking area is located, and so forth. Those are all elements that the zoning bylaw speaks to. There are a number of regulations, and site plan control will also deal with those as well.
Thank you very much. So our next question comes from Kim Liskman. Kim? I see you've unmuted. Are you connected? Okay, seems like we have some sort of an issue here with connecting with Kim. No, still nothing. I know you're trying to mute and unmute, but nothing's happening, unfortunately. I'll move on to the next one and we'll come back and see if we can get her mic working. Erminio Domenico, sorry. Are we you? There you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry. Okay, from the original speech by Mr. Silani, I start to see green all over. Okay, thank you very much, sir. You have a very good vision, but it's being tainted by the fact that we are still thinking about things that shouldn't be happening. And I'm referring again to the old Michigan Tavern. If you allow a 3-story building, that's the maximum you should go, but with a flat roof. Because otherwise, it would interfere with all the nice things you said about the environment, the freedom of walking around, the trails, the parks, and even around such a site. So I would appreciate if the town takes a more serious consideration about that building going from 1 to 3 stories. That's it for now. I wasn't even supposed to speak tonight because I had a busy day, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Mina and Tony Storage.
Hi, good evening. I know that the screen says Victoria Storage. We had a technical difficulty as well, so my daughter jumped in. We are both here, Tony and I. I say thank you for the presentation this evening. Quite a few things were answered for me. I do still have some concerns. They're very much like any of the other people that have spoken. The issues are safety and privacy and parking along the side streets. Sorry, I'm looking at the message here. Start my video like this.
Thank you.
That's okay. Okay. So I still do have that concern. Also, I would like to know, I'd like to be reassured that the parking at the old Michigan site is adequate for what is going there. It is a concern of mine. We have a building on the corner of Malden and Elmira. It's a very small plaza, but I already have parking issues, and I would like to know, I would like to reassure my tenants that there isn't going to be any spillover because there's adequate parking at the old Michigan site. And I also would like to reiterate parking along the side streets. I do think that that is going to pose a problem, as well as any of the walking up and down Malden Road. It all sounds really, really wonderful. I think it's a great idea in theory. I'd like to know now next that the neighborhoods on each side of Malden Road are also, the residents are being respected that way. And I think that's it for me too. You want to say anything? Yeah. Thank you all. The presentation was very informative.
Thank you very much for coming this evening. I know we have Mr. Pike here just to watch. And then we have Ray Coatsworth.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks for the presentation. I'm just here to listen and observe the comments and the nature of the meeting. And I don't have any comments at this time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try Kim one more time to see if we had any luck with the microphone over there. No. Oh. Hi, Kim. Still can't hear anything. I saw you have hit the mic button, but we can't hear anything, unfortunately. But you could forward your questions or comments to Mr. Burgess or Mr. Solani, and they'll be able to assist you. Mr. Solani?
Yeah, Deputy Mayor, I think it would be appropriate, I see Peter Maras here, if he could just provide a bit of an overview with respect to where we're at with the Class EA and the time frame, just so that the residents who are here this evening, a number of questions have been raised regarding safety and improvements. So, some feedback there. In terms of safety and improvements that need to be made on Malden Road. And I think it would be helpful if Mr. Mara just provided a bit of a summary overview of where that stands and when that's expected to come back to council.
Thank you, Mr. Solani. So I didn't want to come in and speak on the Malden Road EA at a planning advisory committee, but certainly a lot of the comments revolved around improvements to Malden Road and what is required. Certainly in 2019, council did recognize that. The kickoff of the environmental assessment occurred in 2019 on Malden Road. This is an update to one that was done in 2009 for Malden Road. So we're in the final stages of that environmental assessment, which looked at all of the things that we talked about tonight. So it's taking into account the new official plan. It's taking into account what is projected for the traffic today and into the future. Miss Jean, you might want to mute your mic. So I'll keep on going. Hopefully we don't continue to get the feedback, but certainly with respect to Malden Road, we're in the final stages of that. And sometime in August is when council will be presented with the environmental assessment report, which will show the preliminary design and all of the aspects of what is proposed to be improved on Malden Road, which consists of the entire roadway, pedestrian facilities, sidewalks on both sides, bike lanes. All of that is available right now for viewing on our website. Certainly, you can go to our website. That's all available to review. It's been a study underway. It's had public consultation. A lot of that information is available on our website. So certainly, if you have an opportunity, you can see that information now. And if you wish to be informed when that report comes forward to council, that will be certainly available to you as well. You can just send us notices and we'll make sure that you are informed of that. But it's really exciting. Again, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a number of aspects to be done, and we're in the upwards of the $15 to $18 million when we look at Malden Road from Normandy to Sandwich Secondary School. So certainly it's not a small feat. A lot of property is required as well along the way to make the improvements to deal with today's traffic and things of that nature. So certainly that's coming forward. And if you keep an eye open and if you want to get some of that preliminary information now, that is available on our website. So certainly take the opportunity to see that. And next steps after the final report is done, certainly then comes down to budget processes and when do the various phases occur and things of that nature. So certainly the first step is to finalize this report, get it on the public record, and then the next steps after that is start to proceed with construction, property acquisitions, and all those other things, but obviously subject to council's approvals and budgets.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Solani, I don't know if you can see in the chat, Kim was able to kind of ask the questions.
Yes, I was just reading those right now. I believe that Ms. Liscombe has two questions. The first one is, does the town know the developer's plans for Orford? And if not, why is the developer doing core sampling on the township property? At this point in time, we know there are a number of developers that are trying to assemble land in that area. No one has come forward with a formal application yet to the town above and beyond the Valente development that was approved and was built on there at Orford and Newman. No other applications have come in for that area, but we are aware that there are several groups in there assembling land. In terms of doing core sampling, I would think that they're probably part of their geotechnical investigations if they're looking at buying some land in that area. So we're not aware of them doing it on town property, but Mr. Maras, listening here as well. So I'm sure he will make some phone calls to make sure that if they have permission of the town before they're doing work on municipal property. With respect to the second question is, with the new zoning bylaw, how many stories will be allowed for the new condo complex? Again, at this point in time, Mr. Palmer has provided the information that shows it's an angular plane. So we don't have a specific height regulation in there. What it is if you're abutting an R1, R2 low density residential, the angular plane will apply depending on the size and the depth of your lot to limit your height in terms of what could potentially be built there in the future. The third one was about traffic, additional traffic. And again, that's something where traffic studies would have to be done. And just like there were improvements to the existing part of Orford, we would expect additional improvements would have to be made and further work has to be done in that area. We have not seen anything at that location. As the developer is allowed that they acquire certain homes they need when it affects all the homes on the street. Again, we don't control what people buy and sell. That is the private sector. People are buying and selling all the time throughout the municipality. And we have no control over who buys and who sells on any given street. So those are the questions that are in the chat there.
Okay, thank you very much. I went through all of our registered delegates at this time. I'm going to open it up to members of the committee or council. Anyone have any questions or comments? No? Okay, so they're being, Mr. Burgess?
I know Mr. Sakuchi had been added to our list very late. I don't know if he has any questions.
No, actually, I'm just listening to
Yeah, I don't.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay, yeah, like I said, I was just listening in for tonight.
All right. Perfect. Is there anyone else who joined us who did want to speak that maybe was out of the
Can't hear you, Crystal. I think you froze.
Oh, there we go. I just typed that. I'm like, my okay. Are we good again?
You're coming in and out. Maybe I'll just jump in while she reconnects. I just want to thank all the residents for coming in, giving your good comments. Mr. Solani, Mr. Mara, Mr. Palmer, good job in addressing. I think you did better the second time than the first time, so you got warmed up. So thank you, and I'm glad we had good participation. We're moving in the right direction. Mr. Solani, as I said before, probably the best planner in the province, if not Canada. And we've got Mr. Palmer, who did a great job, and Mr. Mara and Mr. Burgess, who are a great part of the team. You too as well, Ryan. You just don't talk as much as the other guys. I don't know if Crystal's coming back, so if there's anything else that has to be done, Mr. Solani, I think we're done.
Yeah, Mayor Bondi, at this stage, this is the end of the second information session. So the next step in the process is we've advertised for the statutory public meeting on June 29th. So we will be before council that evening, and people can register and come speak to council that evening if they wish to do so as well. So that's the next step, is June 29th.
Okay. I don't see, oh, there she's back. Okay.
I was back twice and I got booted twice. So I heard your thank you and your comments, Mr. Mayor Bonnie. So thank you so much for stepping in for me. I don't know if there is anything else at this time to be added. Half of my people on my screen are frozen, so I can't tell.
No, Larry stated that everything was over and we've publicly advertised for the June 29th meeting. So I think we're good to go.
Correct. And if anyone has anything that they want to add following this, again, address that to Mr. Burgess, email or send it to him. And we will take all of that into account, as Mr. Palmer indicated, and bring that back to council.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us this evening.
Good night, everyone.